There are stories that shake the soul, not with noise, but with silence. This is one of them. A wounded woman. A nameless dog. And a kind of love that doesn't come with fireworks, but with quiet footsteps in the dark. If you've ever felt forgotten, unseen, or just tired, this story is for you. It's not just about rescue. It's about healing, about second chances, and about how even a soul once abandoned can become someone's home. Stay until the end. This video holds a lesson so deep, it might just change how you see pain, love, and yourself. As Hemingway once said, the world breaks everyone, and afterward, many are strong at the broken places. Lana Whitmore had never feared the quiet. In fact, over the past few years, she'd grown used to it, welcomed it even, like an old friend who didn't demand too much. At 66, she had outlived her parents, her siblings, and most painfully, her husband, Robert. He had passed away 9 winters ago, and since then, silence had taken his place in the house, wrapping itself around her shoulders like a familiar shawl. She had once been a battlefield nurse, calm under pressure, precise in chaos. But now, her life was smaller, quieter. A retired widow with no children and few remaining friends, Lana had found a strange sort of comfort working as a night security guard at a construction site on the edge of town. The job was simple. Watch the gate, log the trucks, and call in anything suspicious. It paid modestly, but it gave her something the walls of her mobile home could not, a reason to get up, to dress, and to be needed. The site wasn't much to look at. Just the steel skeleton of a future strip mall surrounded by dirt and gravel, half swallowed by weeds. But to Lana, it was her post, her routine, her place in the world. Each evening, as the sun slipped behind the bare trees of October, she pulled on her navy windbreaker, locked the camper behind her, and began her slow walk around the perimeter, with a flashlight in one hand and her old thermos in the other. That's when she saw it. It had rained earlier in the day, leaving the ground slick with mud and the air thick with the scent of wet leaves. As she passed the far end of the chain-link fence, near a sagging cottonwood tree, she caught movement out of the corner of her eye. She turned, flashlight beam slicing through the foggy dusk. Something was crouched beneath the tree. Lana narrowed her eyes. At first it looked like a crumpled tarp, dark and soggy. But as she stepped a little closer, the shape shivered. She stopped in her tracks. It was a dog. A German shepherd, by the look of it, though so thin and filthy it was hard to be sure. Its fur clung to its frame in matted clumps, streaked with dirt and something darker, perhaps dried blood. One of its ears hung oddly, as if torn or broken, and its tail curled tightly beneath its belly. The dog didn't bark. It didn't move. It simply stared at the ground, shoulders trembling, as if bracing for impact. Lana didn't speak. She didn't step forward. She simply stood there in the drizzle, watching this creature that looked more shadow than animal. A familiar voice spoke behind her. "Still here, huh?" It was Miguel, the elderly electrician, who sometimes arrived early to prep equipment. He followed her gaze, then clicked his tongue. "That mutt's been hiding out for a while now. Maybe 2 weeks, give or take. Kids say it showed up limping out of nowhere." Lana glanced at him, but said nothing. "Wouldn't get too close," Miguel added. "One of the guys tried tossing it some jerky last week. Poor thing bolted like he'd thrown a brick. Word is it used to belong to some junkyard owner down south. Real mean guy. Heard he beat it half to death before it ran off." Lana's eyes returned to the animal. Rain dripped from the tree above, landing silently on the ground near its paws. The dog didn't flinch. Miguel adjusted his cap. That thing's broken. You can see it in the way it won't look up, like it's waiting to be hit. Lana didn't argue. She didn't need to. She'd seen that look before. On soldiers, on children in war zones, on herself in the mirror some mornings. It wasn't just fear. It was surrender. That dog wasn't hiding. It had given up. Anyway, Miguel sighed, rubbing his hands together, I'd leave it be. Nature's already decided. But Lana wasn't thinking about nature. She was thinking about how something so worn down still found the strength to crawl here, to this cold, muddy corner of the world. Something in her chest ached, not out of pity, but recognition. She wasn't sure how long she stood there before the cold reminded her to move. When she turned and walked away, she didn't glance back, and yet she felt the weight of unseen eyes following her all the way to her post. That night, she couldn't shake the image. The dog's body, limp but alive. The eyes, hollow yet watching. It reminded her of those long days after Robert died, when she sat in their silent home, afraid to touch his things, to make a sound, to feel anything at all. The next morning, as the early crew arrived, Lana remained unusually quiet. She sat at her station, staring at the rain-streaked monitor, her mind elsewhere, not on break-ins or deliveries, but on a shivering figure beneath a tree. She didn't know why she cared. She only knew that she did. And something about that dog, filthy, broken, silent, had stayed with her in a way she couldn't explain. Something about the way it didn't run, didn't snarl, didn't beg. It simply existed, waiting for nothing. And in that stillness, Lana recognized a kind of grief no words could name. It was as if two ghosts had passed each other in the fog, and for one breathless moment, each had seen the other. Maybe tomorrow it would be gone. But something in her hoped it wouldn't be. Every evening after that first encounter, Lana found herself glancing toward the cottonwood tree as if drawn by something more than habit. Something quiet, something wounded. She didn't know why, but that broken creature under the tree had wedged itself into her thoughts and refused to leave. The next night she brought a sandwich, not a fresh one. Just something left over from her own dinner, wrapped in a paper towel and placed gently in a shallow plastic container. She didn't walk up to the dog. She didn't whistle or call out. She simply walked halfway across the yard, crouched near the edge of the tree line, and placed the food on a flat stone, far enough to avoid pressure, close enough to be found. "I'll just set this here," she whispered to the wind. "If you're hungry." Then she turned and walked away, returning to her usual chair beside the trailer, the dull yellow porch light casting long shadows across the gravel. She didn't see the dog move that night, not once. But in the morning, when she returned to the spot before the early crew arrived, the sandwich was gone. The container was licked clean. That was all the invitation she needed. From then on, it became routine. Lana would bring something, bread, leftover stew, a piece of ham wrapped in a napkin, and leave it near the tree. She never lingered. She never watched, but she always left a whisper behind. "No rush, boy. Take your time." Still, the dog didn't approach her. Sometimes she would catch a glimpse of his outline beneath the tree, curled tight like a threadbare blanket. Sometimes she'd see him watching her from the shadows, body low, ears flat, ready to bolt if she even shifted her weight too fast. Weeks passed. She started calling him Stray. Not aloud, not yet, just in her mind. The name wasn't for his lack of a home. It was for the way he drifted, untethered, as if the world had cut all strings that once held him to it. In the quiet hours between midnight and dawn, Lana began talking more, not to him, but in his direction. Softly, about anything, the weather. The cold creeping into her bones, her husband's old truck that wouldn't start that morning, the tea she liked better than coffee now. Her knees, her dreams, the sound the wind made when it hit the east fence just right. "I don't expect you to come over," she said once, cradling her thermos with both hands. "Some things take time." "I know." One particularly cold night, she left out a folded blanket too. The next morning, it had been dragged several feet into the brush. She smiled at that. Still, Stray flinched at everything. A dropped tool, a truck backfiring, even the jingle of her keys. Sometimes he would approach the food only to suddenly dart back into the trees, as if haunted by the memory of a voice yelling or a boot kicking too close. It wasn't until weeks later that she finally got some answers. Margaret, a retired veterinarian and one of the few people Lana still spoke to regularly, came by to drop off some flea medication for a raccoon problem near the lot. When Lana mentioned the dog, Margaret's expression changed. "Oh, the German Shepherd?" she asked. "Tan and black, thin as a reed." "That's him." "I know that dog," Margaret said grimly. "Or I think I do. He was part of a litter used by some backwoods guy who trained guard dogs the wrong way. No love, no care, just chains and fear. There were reports. One neighbor said she saw him beating the dogs with rubber mallets and withholding food so they'd respect the hand that feeds. I guess this one got out." Lana felt something sharp twist behind her ribs. "That explains the eyes," she murmured. Margaret nodded. "Explains the way he doesn't trust. But he's still hanging around, huh? Hasn't left. Then he hasn't given up yet." The words stayed with her. Because, truthfully, Lana had been giving up in her own quiet way. She didn't say it out loud. People rarely do. But ever since Robert passed, something inside her had gone dim. He had been her compass, her rhythm, her safe place. Without him, days blurred. Nights were longer. The phone rang less. The mailbox became a place for coupons and medical flyers. She hadn't realized how invisible she'd started to feel, until she saw that same invisibility mirrored in the eyes of a wounded dog. And so, even as the weather turned colder and the ground hardened under frost, Lana kept showing up. With food, yes. But also with space, with silence, with presence. She didn't demand love. She didn't expect thanks. Every offering she placed by the tree was a gesture without strings, an open hand that asked for nothing in return. Two souls, frayed at the edges, scarred by absence, stitched loosely together not by words, but by the simple fact that neither one had walked away. Some nights, Lana would sit outside longer than she should, wrapped in two coats, her thermos cold in her hands, just listening, hoping. And in those moments, those silent in-between hours where no one else was looking, it felt less like she was trying to save something wild, and more like they were saving each other. It happened on a morning as ordinary as any other. The sun hadn't yet broken the horizon, and the mist still hung thick across the construction site like breath on a mirror. Lana was stepping out of her camper with a thermos of tea when she saw movement near the cottonwood tree. She paused, expecting the familiar sight of Stray, slinking through the shadows toward the flat stone where she always left food. But this time was different. He wasn't sneaking. He wasn't watching from a distance. He was walking, deliberately, slowly, toward her. Her breath caught. She didn't move. She didn't speak. She let her arms hang loose at her sides, body relaxed, eyes soft, heart pounding with a cautious kind of hope. Stray stopped just a few feet away. He sat down. Not curled up, not hunched over, but upright, facing her directly. His tail remained still, but his ears were no longer flat. And most striking of all, He raised his head and looked straight into her eyes. Not through her. Not past her. At her. Lana felt something in her chest crack. Not break exactly, more like a shift, a release, like the slow thaw of something long frozen. Her throat tightened, and before she could stop herself, her eyes filled with tears. "You looked," she whispered. "You actually looked." He didn't come closer. He didn't wag, but he didn't flinch either. And in that moment, it was enough. It was everything. She blinked quickly, wiping her face with the sleeve of her jacket, then slowly crouched down, not to reach for him, but to lower herself to his level. She didn't want to tower over him. She wanted to meet him where he was. "I think," she said softly, "you're ready for a little more." That afternoon, she cleared a corner of her security tent and set up a small space just for him. She laid out a blanket, an old one that Robert used to keep in his truck, the edges frayed but still warm. Next to it, she placed a plush toy, faded but intact, a soft green frog with one missing eye. It had belonged to Robert, in a way, a gag gift from a co-worker that he used to keep on his nightstand. Lana had never been able to throw it away. Now it had a new purpose. When she returned to the tent the next day, the blanket had been dragged into a tighter pile, and the frog toy was tucked beneath a paw. Stray had made himself at home. Bit by bit, he began to show his true self. It started with small things. One night, she found her slipper missing. She assumed she had misplaced it until she noticed a familiar pink sole poking out from behind the tool cabinet. A few days later, she caught him nose deep in a small trash bin, tail wagging ever so slightly before he backed out, feigning innocence with a sideways glance and a slow, exaggerated yawn. Lana laughed harder than she had in months. He was, she realized, funny. Not in a forced or goofy way, but in that subtle, clumsy, almost childlike way that dogs have when they begin to feel safe again. He would nudge her elbow when she wasn't looking, or place a pine cone at her feet like it was a treasure. Once he tried to hop onto her lap, an effort that ended in a tangle of limbs and an overturned chair. Even Miguel, who had once called the dog damaged beyond repair, began to soften. "I'll admit," he grunted one night while fixing a light fixture, "he's got personality." "Never thought I'd say it, but the mutt makes the night shift feel less dead." Lana glanced at Stray, who was sprawled on the blanket near the door, one ear flopped inside out, snoring gently. "He's a good listener," she replied with a smile. It became their routine. After the final truck cleared out each evening, and the lot fell quiet under the pale security lights, Lana and Stray would sit side by side, sometimes on the stoop of her trailer, sometimes near the fence, where the wind whistled low through the chain links. He would lean gently against her leg. She would sip her tea in silence. They rarely made a sound, but in that shared stillness, something unspoken passed between them, something old and heavy and strangely comforting. It wasn't about words. It was about presence, about two beings who had both survived the long winter of loneliness and were now learning to sit in the spring of something new. She still called him Stray, though the name no longer fit. He wasn't lost anymore. He was just learning the shape of being found. And every evening, as they sat in the quiet together, Lana felt the past loosen its grip a little more. The ache of Robert's absence, the sting of forgotten birthdays, the dull hum of days that used to stretch endlessly, none of it disappeared. But beside this once broken creature, who now carried a stuffed frog around like a crown, it all began to feel lighter. Not gone, but survivable. And that, Lana thought, was a miracle all on its own. It was the kind of night that made the bones ache. The wind had picked up just after 9, slicing between the beams of the half-finished building like icy fingers. The floodlights flickered as gusts swept across the empty lot. Clouds hung low and heavy, threatening more rain. Lana zipped her coat higher and stepped out of her trailer with a sigh, flashlight in hand. It had been a long day. A minor gas leak in one of the pipes had delayed the day shift, and the site manager had asked her to double-check the second-floor storage area before locking up. Normally, she would have waited until morning. Her knees weren't what they used to be. But something in her gut told her not to put it off. She had always listened to that feeling, on battlefields, in hospitals, even when choosing which route to take home from the grocery store. Just a quick look, she told herself, as she made her way across the gravel, Stray trailing silently behind her like a quiet shadow. He rarely let her out of his sight now, though he still kept a few feet of distance unless invited closer. He wasn't the bounding, tail-wagging kind of dog. He was steady, watchful. And tonight he watched as Lana climbed the creaky wooden stairs up to the second floor of the unfinished building. The structure groaned in the wind. Boards creaked, tops flapped. Lana scanned her flashlight across the open beams and half-stacked lumber. Nothing unusual, just the usual hum of electricity and the whistle of night air through exposed walls. She turned to head back down. And that's when it happened. Her foot, slick with moisture from the damp steps, slid. The flashlight clattered from her hand as her body twisted, her heel catching on the edge of the stair. Time slowed for a heartbeat, just long enough for her to register what was happening, for her arms to flail wildly in the air, before she crashed down, her head hitting the cold metal railing with a sickening thud. Then nothing. Silence. Stray had stopped at the base of the stairs, pacing as she disappeared from sight. When he heard the sound, the fall, the impact, the sudden stillness, his ears perked sharply. He sniffed the air, pawed at the bottom step, then froze. Then something ancient kicked in, something primal. He barked. Once, twice, then again, louder, sharper, rising into a high-pitched howl that echoed across the lot. Stray had never barked before. Not like this. He'd whimpered. He'd growled in his sleep, but never this raw, urgent sound that cut through the cold like a flare in the dark. Miguel was inside the maintenance shack behind the trailers, half asleep with a cup of instant coffee in hand, when he heard it. At first he thought it was a coyote, but then he heard the second bark, then the third, and he knew that voice. That dog, he muttered, setting the cup down with a splash and grabbing his flashlight. He followed the sound to the main building, the barks growing louder, more frantic. When he rounded the corner, he saw Stray darting up and down the base of the stairs, spinning in circles, leaping toward the second floor, then turning to bark again. What the? Miguel hurried up the steps, heart thudding. Halfway up, his light caught something that made him stop cold. There she was. Lana lay sprawled on the landing, motionless. One arm tucked awkwardly beneath her, the other stretched out toward the railing. Blood was trickling down the side of her face from a gash at her temple. Her skin looked too pale in the harsh light. "Lana?" He dropped to his knees beside her, checked for a pulse. It was there, weak but steady. "Hang in there," he breathed, reaching for his phone. His fingers trembled as he called emergency services, shouting directions into the receiver. It was only 10 minutes before the ambulance arrived, but 10 minutes can stretch like hours when you're kneeling beside someone who might not wake up. Stray stayed at the bottom of the stairs, tail stiff, eyes fixed upward. When the paramedics wheeled her out, he whined, a low, aching sound, and followed a few paces behind before stopping at the edge of the lot. One of the younger paramedics glanced at Miguel. "Whose dog is that?" Miguel hesitated. "It's hers," he said. "Sort of." The hospital was quiet when Lana opened her eyes. It took a moment to understand where she was. The sterile lights, the soft beeping machines, the faint antiseptic smell. Her head pounded. Her arm was bandaged. A nurse entered the room and offered a kind smile. "You're lucky," she said. "A few more minutes and it could have been much worse. You've got a mild concussion and some bruised ribs, but no internal bleeding." Lana blinked, struggling to process. Then her voice rasped, low and hoarse. "Is he all right?" The nurse looked puzzled. "Your co-worker?" "No," Lana whispered. "The dog, Stray." "Oh, right," the nurse said, glancing at the chart. "I think he's fine. Your friend Miguel brought your things by. He said the dog's staying at the site." Lana let out a shaky breath. Not from pain, from relief. Later that afternoon, Miguel visited. He stood at the edge of her hospital bed, holding her thermos and a photo someone had snapped on a phone, a blurry image of Stray sitting at the base of the stairs, head tilted toward the sky. "He wouldn't stop barking," Miguel said, voice softer than usual. "Not until I found you." He saved your life." Lana looked at the photo, her throat tightening. "I didn't know he had it in him," Miguel added. "I did," Lana replied. He just didn't know it yet. Outside, the wind had calmed. The clouds were parting, and somewhere, back at the construction site, a dog sat waiting. Not because he was told to, but because he wanted to. And for the first time in a long time, Lana didn't feel alone. The world moved slower after the fall. Lana spent nearly a week in the hospital. Her concussion, though mild, left her dizzy and easily fatigued. Her ribs ached with every breath. Doctors advised rest, no heavy lifting, and most importantly, no returning to work right away. For someone like Lana, that last part was the hardest. She wasn't built for idleness. All her life she had taken care of others. First as a nurse in the army, later as a wife, then simply as a good neighbor. Her hands, though lined and tired, had never been still for long. But now, in the small rented house where she recovered, surrounded by quiet walls and a chair that creaked when no one sat in it, Lana felt more like a ghost than a person. She worried about Stray. Miguel had promised to look after him, but every time she called, his voice held a trace of concern he didn't quite hide. "He hasn't been eating," Miguel admitted on the second day. "Just sits by the corner where you used to park. Won't come inside the trailer, won't even look at me." Lana closed her eyes, picturing him, sitting alone in the cold gravel, head low, ears drooping, waiting for something he couldn't name. On the third day, Margaret came by with soup and a bag of groceries. After placing them on the counter, she looked Lana in the eye and said, "Do you have something that smells like you? A coat, maybe?" Lana blinked. "My windbreaker. The navy one. It's still in the truck at the site, I think." Margaret nodded. "I'll get it to him." That evening, Miguel called again. "He sniffed it for a while," he said slowly. Then he curled up with it. "Ate some chicken later. First time he's eaten since you left." Lana pressed the phone tighter to her ear, her voice barely audible. "Thank you." It would be 3 more days before she could return. When she stepped back onto the gravel lot, it was just after sunrise. The air was crisp, tinted with pine and fresh mud. Her steps were slower now, careful. A bandage still peeked from beneath her cap, but her eyes were alert. She didn't need to call his name. The moment her foot crunched the gravel, she heard claws scrambling against the concrete. Stray bolted around the corner like a storm let loose, his eyes wide, ears perked, and for the first time since she'd known him, tail wagging in fast, uncertain bursts. He stopped just a few feet away, staring as if unsure whether to believe his own eyes. Lana opened her arms. That was all it took. With a sharp bark, Stray leapt forward, landing squarely against her chest. His paws gripped her jacket, his head buried in the crook of her neck. He whimpered, not the fearful sound of the past, but a high, trembling release of joy, confusion, relief. Lana laughed through the tears already streaming down her cheeks. "You missed me," she whispered, pressing her forehead to his. "Well, I missed you more." They stood like that for a long time, woman and dog, both scarred, both breathing a little easier because the other was still here. Later that day, Miguel watched from the break area as Stray, still not leaving Lana's side, followed her from room to room. "Never seen anything like it," he muttered, sipping coffee. Margaret, who'd come by to check on Lana's stitches, nodded. "He chose her," she said softly. "Dogs know. Especially the ones who've been through hell." That afternoon, Lana sat under the cottonwood tree with Stray curled at her feet. Her fingers brushed over the fur behind his ears. "I think you've earned a name," she said quietly. Stray looked up at her, tongue lolling slightly, eyes soft. She exhaled. "Not Stray anymore," she continued. "That was the version of you that didn't know where you belonged." He blinked. "I'm going to call you Faith." The name floated between them, warm like sunlight through winter glass. "Because maybe what I lost all these years," she added, voice breaking just a little, "wasn't just Robert or my place in the world. Maybe it was the belief that someone might need me again, that I wasn't just drifting." "You gave that back." Faith didn't understand the words, not in the way humans did, but he understood tone. He understood tears. And he understood that in that moment, Lana wasn't just giving him a name. She was giving him a place in her life, in her heart. From that day on, everything changed. Lana submitted her resignation quietly, without fanfare. The job had served its purpose. It brought her to Faith, and now it was time to do something more. She packed her things, donated half of them, and accepted Margaret's offer to move into the small caretaker's quarters behind the Animal Rescue Center, where Margaret volunteered. It wasn't glamorous, but it was meaningful. There, Lana and Faith found a new rhythm. They helped clean pens, sort supplies, and comfort animals too scared to be touched. Faith, once terrified of everything, became a silent companion for newcomers, sitting beside shivering dogs, laying gently near the cages of rescued cats. His presence calmed them in ways no medication could. "He's not just a survivor," Margaret said one day, watching him curl around a trembling beagle. "He's a healer." Lana smiled, her hands busy brushing a matted husky. "We both are." Word of Faith's story spread, how a battered stray had saved the life of a woman who had once saved so many. Children visited. Elderly couples donated blankets. A local paper ran a short article titled, "The Dog Named Faith Who Taught a Widow to Hope Again." But for Lana, it was never about headlines. It was about waking up each morning to soft paws beside her bed, about sharing lunch in the garden with a dog who now knew how to ask for affection without fear, about believing, truly believing, that broken things could still be beautiful. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, Lana sat beside Faith on the back porch of the rescue center. The light was golden. The world was quiet. She leaned over, pressing a kiss to his temple. "You're not a stray anymore," she whispered. "You're my reason." Faith rested his head on her knee, and together they watched the sun go down. Two souls who had once been lost, now found in the quiet grace of simply being needed again. The sky that afternoon was brushed with the soft grays of late November, the kind of muted light that felt like a whisper rather than a presence. The trees around the Animal Rescue Center had all but shed their leaves, and the wind carried the dry scent of pine needles and distant smoke from a neighbor's fireplace. Lana was organizing a box of old papers in the storage room behind her quarters, sorting through documents she hadn't looked at in years. Tax receipts, expired warranties, a yellowed map of New Mexico. At the bottom, buried beneath a stack of folded medical records and an old VA envelope. She found it. The envelope was cream-colored, slightly wrinkled, her handwriting scrawled across the front in dark blue ink. No stamp. No address, just a name written with careful intention. Robert. Her breath caught. She sat slowly, hands trembling, and opened it. The letter inside had been written nearly 6 years ago, maybe longer. The ink had faded slightly, and the corners were soft from time. She had no memory of writing it, but as her eyes scanned the words, the feelings returned all at once. "I'm still here," it read, "but I don't feel like it most days. The house is quiet. The kind of quiet that hums in your ears, that presses into your ribs. I sleep too much or not at all. I keep looking for something kind to happen, just one sign that I'm not invisible. I miss your coffee. I miss your bad jokes. I miss the way you used to hum before you spoke. It's like I'm a tree in winter, standing still, waiting for something warm to find me." Lana stopped reading. Her fingers brushed the edge of the page. Her chest felt heavy, not with grief exactly, but with the memory of it, a weight that no longer crushed her, but still had shape, still had presence. Faith was asleep beside her chair, curled into a perfect crescent, his chest rising and falling in slow, steady rhythm. The green plush frog, now missing both eyes, rested between his paws. He looked peaceful. Without thinking, Lana reached for a pen from the shelf. She stared at the letter for a long time, then leaned over the table and, in the same careful script she had used all those years ago, wrote a final paragraph. It came, Robert. The kind thing I was waiting for. He doesn't know how to love the way people do. He doesn't say much, and he's afraid of thunder and sudden movements. But he stayed. He chose me when he didn't have to. His name is Faith. She paused, then added one last line. He didn't know how to love, but he still saved me. When she finished, she folded the letter again, smoothing the creases with her palm. She walked to the living room, where an old photograph of her and Robert sat framed on a small table beside the window. It was taken the year they bought their first camper. His arm around her shoulders, both of them squinting in the sunlight, wind in their hair. He had always placed his hand on that photo before dinner. Never spoke. Just a quiet gesture, full of something reverent. Now, it was her turn. Lana slid the letter behind the frame, between the glass and the wood. Not hidden. Not forgotten. Just home. She sat on the armchair beside it, the weight of her words still lingering in her chest. She didn't cry. Not this time. The sadness had changed shape. It was no longer a storm. It was a song, low and familiar and somehow comforting. Faith stirred beside her. His ears twitched. His eyes opened briefly and met hers, then slowly closed again. He didn't move, but his tail thumped once against the floor. He didn't know about letters, or grief, or how much a name could carry. But he understood breath, he understood silence, and he understood the difference between a heart that trembled and a heart at rest. Outside, the sun dipped low, casting golden threads through the window. The light caught the frame, warming the photograph and the folded note behind it. Lana reached down, resting her hand gently on Faith's back. "I don't think he'd mind," she whispered. "Me telling you thank you instead of him." Faith didn't stir, but his breathing slowed again, deep and even, as if the room itself had exhaled. That night, Lana didn't leave a light on in the hallway. She didn't need to. Some things, once broken, never return to what they were. But sometimes, if you're lucky, they become something else. something quieter, stronger, softer. And sometimes, healing doesn't arrive as a grand gesture or a miracle. Sometimes it arrives on 4 quiet paws, with eyes that once flinched but now stay steady. Sometimes it arrives without words, but it stays, and that was enough. By spring, Faith had become more than just another rescued dog. At the Animal Rescue Center, people had started calling him their gentle guardian. He didn't bark at visitors, didn't leap into laps or demand attention. He simply sat on the porch beside the entrance, head slightly lowered, eyes soft and thoughtful, as if he were listening to something only he could hear. Children often reached out shyly to touch him. Older couples paused to smile as they passed. Volunteers began to call him good luck, or a calming presence, or that soulful dog by the door. And though he never sought the spotlight, he seemed to understand his place there, present, patient, peaceful. Faith had not transformed into a playful puppy or a picture-perfect mascot. His scars remained, both visible and not. He still flinched at sudden movement. He still slept best near Lana's boots. But there was something new in him now, something solid. He was no longer a stray. He was home. One morning in early May, a small group of children from a nearby support school came for a tour of the center. Among them was a boy named Owen, no older than 9, with sandy brown hair and eyes that darted quickly before retreating. He didn't speak, not to the staff, not to the other children. His teacher, Mrs. Harper, mentioned gently that he was on the spectrum and hadn't used full sentences in over a year. The group wandered between kennels, meeting cats, rabbits, and 2 lively pit bulls that barked so much they had to be moved to the back. Owen kept to himself, hands in his jacket pockets, gaze fixed on the floor. That is, until they reached the front porch. Faith was there, as always, seated beside the welcome mat like a quiet sentinel. Lana sat on a nearby bench, sorting adoption pamphlets. She smiled as the kids approached. "He won't move unless he's invited," she told them, "but he doesn't mind if you sit with him." The others hovered nearby. Owen stood still, then slowly he walked forward. He didn't reach out at first. He simply crouched a few feet from Faith, staring at him intently. Faith met his gaze, only briefly, then looked down again, resting his chin on his paw. He didn't inch away. He didn't react. He just waited. Owen's fingers curled, then relaxed. His shoulders loosened, and after a long, silent pause, he whispered, "I like him." Lana looked up, her breath catching. Owen reached out, his hand hovering, then gently touching the top of Faith's head. "He doesn't stare at me," Owen said, a little louder. "I like that." Ms. Harper brought a hand to her mouth. Her eyes filled with tears. After the group left, she pulled Lana aside. "He's never said that much. Not in public. Not since his father left." Lana watched as Faith settled again in the sunlit corner of the porch. "He doesn't ask for much," she said quietly. "But he offers a lot." Later that week, at a small community event hosted by the rescue center, Lana was invited to share their story. She stood before a modest group, retirees, shelter volunteers, a few families, holding a photo of Faith as he looked when she first found him. Thin, hollow-eyed, half hidden behind a tree. "I don't want to take up much of your time," she began. "But I want to talk about what it means to be seen." She paused, fingers brushing the edges of the picture. "There was a time in my life," she continued, "when I wasn't sure anyone remembered me. I'd lost my husband. I'd retired from a job that used to define me. And most days, I felt like I was watching life happen from a window I couldn't open." She glanced toward the back of the room, where Faith sat patiently on a mat, tail curled around his side. And then this dog appeared. He was terrified, battered, so sure the world was going to hurt him again. But over time, With patience and silence mostly, he let me near. She smiled, voice softening. And then one day he came to me. Without asking for anything, he just came. The room was quiet, still. I named him Faith, she said. Not because I gave him mine, but because he gave me back mine. Maybe that's what healing really is. Not fixing everything, not forgetting the pain, but finding something or someone that makes staying worth it. There was a long, quiet breath in the room. Applause came gently at first, then grew. That evening, Lana and Faith walked home under the silver glow of the moon. At the back of the garden behind the center, there was a wooden bench where Lana liked to sit in the early evenings. Faith always followed her there, even when the porch was more comfortable. It was his favorite spot. He would curl in the grass nearby, close to the same kind of tree he once used to hide behind. His eyes still lowered sometimes, the way they did when he wasn't sure how to be brave. But he didn't run anymore. That night, Lana sat beside him, her coat wrapped tight against the breeze. "You know," she said gently, "you still look like you're waiting for something, like a shadow might come back." Faith shifted slightly, but didn't lift his head. She reached down, brushed her fingers through the fur between his ears. "You don't have to hide anymore," she whispered. "We're both home now." Faith closed his eyes, his breathing slowed. And under the quiet stars above, nothing more was needed. Because sometimes, the greatest truth is this: even the souls that are bruised, hesitant, imperfect, especially those, deserve a place to belong. And in a world that so often forgets the broken, two beings who had once been invisible to everyone else had found each other and stayed. If this story touched something inside you, don't just scroll away. Leave a comment. Share your thoughts. And please, subscribe. Your support helps this small channel grow toward 1,000 subscribers, a milestone that would mean the world to me. Every story here is made with heart, for people who believe in second chances and the healing power of love, especially the kind that comes with muddy paws and silent eyes. Remember, not all those who wander are lost. Sometimes, they're just waiting for someone who sees them. Thank you for watching. I hope Faith's journey stays with you long after the video ends. You too are worthy of love, no matter how many scars you carry.